Shadows of Jacaranda Lane. The day Deepa Mehra was born, the oldest banyan tree in Nalpur village split down the middle during a thunderstorm. By the time she turned 7, the village well had dried up 3 summers in a row. When she was 13, locusts destroyed the harvest 2 weeks after she'd accidentally broken the temple's clay offering bowl. And at 16, when her cousin Priya fell ill with a mysterious fever after borrowing Deepa's hairbrush, the whispers that had followed her since birth crystallized into something harder, colder. "That girl carries misfortune in her shadow," the village elders would murmur when she passed. "Mark my words, nothing good grows where she walks." Deepa had learned to make herself small. She moved through the narrow lanes of Nalpur with her eyes fixed on the dust beneath her feet, shoulders curved inward, as if perpetually bracing for impact. Her mother, once affectionate, now touched her only with hesitation, as if expecting her skin to burn. Her father couldn't meet her gaze at all. The final blow came when her youngest brother Nikhil, the only one who still smiled at her without reservation, died suddenly of dengue fever 3 days after Deepa had gifted him a hand-carved wooden elephant. "Enough," her father had said, that night, his voice hollow with grief. "The gods have sent us message enough. You cannot stay here anymore." They gave her a small bundle of clothes, 300 rupees, and directions to the nearest city. No one from the family walked her to the bus stop. No one waved goodbye. At 18, Deepa began a life of constant motion. She traveled light, carrying only a small cotton bag with her few possessions. Cities blurred into towns, which faded into villages, none of which ever became home. She cleaned dishes at roadside dabas, swept floors at small shops, and eventually found more stable work at a tailor's workshop in Mehrabad, a mid-sized city 300 kilometers from Nalpur. "You work hard," Jamila, the shop owner, told her after watching Deepa meticulously organize spools of thread by color and thickness. "But girl, you never look anyone in the eye. In this city, that makes people think you're hiding something." "Maybe I am," Deepa had replied softly, her fingers still sorting crimson from vermilion. For 2 years, she lived in a tiny room above the tailor shop. At night, she'd sit cross-legged on her thin mattress and trace the outline of the wooden elephant pendant she wore, the twin to the one she'd given Nikhil. In those quiet moments, she'd allow herself to wonder. If circumstances followed her like persistent shadows, was she truly their source, or merely caught in their path? When the tailor shop closed after Jamila's husband fell ill, Deepa moved, again this time to Chandpur, a bustling university town. There she found work at a small bookshop called Kitab Gar, owned by an elderly professor named Sharma. The shop smelled of aging paper and cardamom tea, and the shelves reached toward the ceiling like the banyan trees of her childhood. "Books don't judge," Sharma told her on her first day. "They simply wait to be understood, rather like people, don't you think?" Deepa didn't answer, but that night she borrowed a book of poetry from the shop. It was the first time she'd read for pleasure since leaving Nalpur. The words felt like rainfall after drought, and something long dormant inside her began, cautiously, to unfurl. She didn't know it yet, but the shadows that had chased her from Nalpur were about to take a different shape entirely. And in the dusty back room of Kitab Gar, between forgotten manuscripts and abandoned journals, waited the first thread of a story that would eventually lead her home. The Whispers. Between pages, Professor Sharma's bookshop became Deepa's sanctuary over the next 6 months. She arrived each morning before dawn to sweep the wooden floors and dust the endless shelves, finding comfort in the quiet company of thousands of stories waiting silently to be discovered. The professor himself appeared only in the afternoons, shuffling in with his thermos of cardamom tea and settling behind the antique desk to grade papers or assist the occasional customer. The basement needs organizing, Sharma announced one rainy Tuesday, handing Deepa a tarnished brass key. Old manuscripts and journals down there. University students donate them after graduation. Most are worthless, but sometimes there are treasures. The basement stairs creaked beneath Deepa's weight as she descended into the musty darkness. A single bulb illuminated stacks of boxes and precarious towers of leather-bound journals. The air felt thick with forgotten words and abandoned thoughts. For 3 days, Deepa sorted through academic notes, failed novel attempts, and countless diaries filled with the mundane details of strangers' lives. On the 4th day, she found it, a leather journal with no name on its cover, bound with a fraying red cord. When she untied it, a pressed jasmine flower fell to the floor, its dried petals nearly translucent with age. The first entry was dated just 5 years earlier. I dream of a girl with sorrow-filled eyes. I've seen her only once at the Nalpur Harvest Festival, standing alone beneath a string of marigolds. She looked at me for just a moment before turning away. But in that glance was a universe of unspoken pain. Who puts such sadness in a young girl's eyes? I find myself drawing her face again and again, though I know I haven't captured it right. There's something about her that feels like a question I'm meant to answer. Deepa's hands trembled. Nalpur, her village. She turned the page. The journal belonged to someone named Vikram Khatri, an artist who had apparently traveled through various villages documenting local folklore through sketches and stories. But woven between his observations about rural traditions were recurring mentions of the girl with sorrow-filled eyes from Nalpur. The villagers speak of a cursed girl who left 2 years ago. They say misfortune followed her like a faithful dog. But when I ask what exactly she did to earn such a reputation, their answers are vague, coincidences and superstitions strung together like cheap beads. I wonder where she is now. This supposed harbinger of bad luck. Deepa sat on the dusty floor, the journal open in her lap, as rain pattered against the small basement window. The coincidence seemed impossible, that she would find this particular journal in this particular bookshop. Yet here it was, containing fragments of her own story written in a stranger's hand. As she read further, she discovered Vikram had collected stories of cursed individuals from villages across the region. In his entries, he analyzed the psychological and sociological patterns that led communities to designate scapegoats for their misfortunes. These cursed individuals share common traits. They are often different in some noticeable way, or their births coincide with natural disasters. The community's fear congeals around them, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. The so-called cursed begin to believe in their own toxicity. But what if someone showed them a different reflection? When Professor Sharma came looking for her hours later, he found Deepa still seated on the floor, surrounded by pages she'd carefully removed from the journal and arranged in a semicircle. "Found something interesting?" he asked, adjusting his thick glasses. "Do you know who donated this?" Deepa held up the journal, her voice uncharacteristically urgent. The professor squinted at the leather binding. "Ah, the Khatri collection. Came in about 8 months ago. Young artist fellow. Works with the Cultural Preservation Society now, I believe. He donated several sketchbooks and journals when he moved to their headquarters in Devpur." "Devpur?" Deepa repeated. The city was less than a day's journey away? Indeed. They're doing interesting work there, documenting vanishing traditions. Sharma peered at her over his glasses. "You seem quite taken with his writings." Deepa carefully retied the journal with its cord, the dried jasmine flower secured between its pages. "He's written about my village," she said simply, "and about me, though he doesn't know it." That night, in her small rented room above a spice shop, Deepa made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. For years she had been running, from her past, from her supposed curse, from herself. But Vikram's words had planted a seed of doubt about the narrative that had shaped her life. What if the story she'd been told about herself wasn't the only possible interpretation? What if someone else was already rewriting it? The next morning, she requested a week's leave from Professor Sharma. She packed her few belongings, tucked the journal securely in her bag beside her wooden elephant pendant, and purchased a bus ticket to Devpur. For the first time since leaving Nalpur, Deepa was moving towards something rather than away. Cartography of strangers Devpur sprawled along the banks of the Narmada River like a city that couldn't quite decide what it wanted to be. Ancient temples stood defiantly amid gleaming office buildings, while narrow lanes of centuries-old houses twisted between modern apartment complexes. As Deepa stepped off the bus, the chaotic symphony of car horns, temple bells, and street vendors' calls enveloped her. The Cultural Preservation Society occupied a colonial-era building near the river, its white facade adorned with intricate wooden balconies. A bronze plaque beside the entrance proclaimed, "Preserving the stories that made us." Deepa hesitated at the bottom of the steps, clutching the journal to her chest. What exactly was she planning to say? "Hello, I'm the cursed girl you wrote about?" The absurdity of her impulsive journey suddenly struck her, and she nearly turned away. But then the massive wooden doors swung open, and a young woman in a bright yellow kurta emerged. "Are you coming in, or just admiring the architecture?" the woman called out with a smile. "We're about to close for lunch." "I'm looking for someone who works here," Deepa managed. "Vikram Khatri." The woman's smile faltered slightly. "Vikram? He's not here anymore. Left about 2 months ago for a documentation project in the tribal areas. Very remote, no phone service, nothing." She studied Deepa's crestfallen expression. "I'm Farah, by the way. I work in the archives. Was it important? Your business with Vikram?" Before Deepa could respond, the skies opened, and rain began to pour in sudden violent sheets. Farah grabbed Deepa's arm, pulling her inside the building. "Monsoon timing," Farah laughed, shaking water from her dupatta. "Looks like you're stuck with us for a bit. Come on, I was just heading to the canteen. You can tell me about Vikram over chai." The society's canteen was a sun-drenched room filled with mismatched furniture and the smell of spices. As they sipped cardamom tea, Deepa hesitantly showed Farah the journal. "This is definitely Vikram's," Farah confirmed, running her fingers over the sketches. "He was obsessed with documenting what he called modern folklore, how villages create their own myths to explain misfortune." She looked up sharply. "Wait. You're her, aren't you? The girl from Nalpur he kept talking about?" Deepa nodded slowly. "He looked for you, you know," Farah said quietly. "Went back to Nalpur twice. The second time, your family threatened him, told him to stop asking questions about their shame." Something cold settled in Deepa's stomach. "They called me that? Their shame?" Farah's eyes softened. "Vikram has a theory about people like you. He calls it the narrative burden. How some people are forced to carry the weight of a community's fears in the stories told about them." She hesitated, then added, "He's collecting these stories for a reason. His own sister was labeled in a similar way in their village. She didn't survive it." The rain continued to drum against the windows as Farah introduced Deepa to other society members. There was elderly Dr. Joshi, who documented disappearing medicinal practices, and Naveen, who recorded folk music on ancient instruments. By evening, when the rain finally subsided, Deepa had been offered a small room in the society's guest house and a temporary position helping to organize the folklore archives. "Vikram will be back in 3 months, Farah told her. "And I think you'll find that what we do here might interest you. We're all cartographers of a sort, mapping the invisible boundaries of belief and tradition." Those 3 months transformed Deepa. Surrounded by people who treated stories as things to be examined rather than passively accepted, she began to deconstruct the narrative that had defined her life. She learned that dozens of villages had their own cursed individuals, each bearing remarkable similarities to her own experience. It's never about the person, Dr. Joshi explained one evening as they catalogued stories of village scapegoats. It's about the community's need for explanation in a world full of random suffering. When a letter finally arrived from Vikram announcing his imminent return, Deepa felt both anticipation and fear. In her imagination, he had become a figure of almost mythic importance, the first person to question the story she'd been told about herself. The night before his scheduled arrival, a powerful storm hit Devpur. The Narmada River swelled beyond its banks, and the lower floors of the society building flooded. As society members scrambled to save waterlogged manuscripts and artifacts, Deepa found herself wading through knee-deep water in the archive room, passing precious documents to Farah on higher ground. "The river's still rising," someone shouted from the doorway. "Everyone needs to move to the second floor." As they hurried to save what they could, Deepa spotted a wooden case floating near the window. Without thinking, she splashed toward it, recognizing it as the box containing the oldest palm leaf manuscripts in the collection. As her fingers closed around its handle, the window behind her shattered under the pressure of the rising water. "Deepa!" Farah screamed as the current rushed in, pulling Deepa and the manuscript box toward the broken window. A strong arm suddenly wrapped around Deepa's waist, anchoring her against the flood's pull. She turned to find herself looking into unfamiliar yet somehow known eyes, dark, intense, questioning. "Hold on," the man said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "I've got you." And somehow, Deepa knew immediately that Vikram Khatri had returned to Devpur a day earlier than expected. The weight of rainwater dawn broke over a subdued Devpur, the receding floodwaters leaving behind a layer of silt and debris across the city's lower streets. From the society's second-floor balcony, Deepa watched relief workers distributing food and blankets to displaced families gathered in the temple courtyard across the street. "Tea?" Vikram appeared beside her, offering a steaming clay cup. He looked different from how she'd imagined him, shorter, with wire-rimmed glasses and a slight limp from an old injury. Yet his eyes were exactly as she'd expected, thoughtful, observant, kind. They had barely spoken the night before, too busy helping with emergency efforts after he'd pulled her from the floodwaters. Now, in the quiet morning light, an awkward silence stretched between them. "You saved the Madhavpur manuscripts," he finally said, nodding toward the wooden box that now sat drying in the sun. "They're irreplaceable. 17th century accounts of village justice systems." "You saved me," Deepa replied simply. "A fair exchange then." A half smile crossed his face. "Though I'm still not entirely clear on who you are or why you have my old journal." So Deepa told him everything, about growing up as Nalpur's designated misfortune, about her exile and wandering years, about finding his journal in Professor Sharma's bookshop basement. As she spoke, Vikram's expression shifted from curiosity to recognition to something deeper and more complicated. "I remember you," he said quietly when she finished. "At the Harvest Festival, you were wearing a blue dupatta with silver threads. You looked cursed," Deepa offered wryly. "No, you looked like someone carrying something too heavy alone." He hesitated. "I went back looking for you, you know. Twice," Farah told me. Vikram ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking embarrassed. "It probably seems strange to you, my interest in your story. But after what happened with my sister, tell me about her," Deepa said gently. They spent the day talking as they helped clean the society's water-damaged ground floor. Vikram told her about his sister, Priyanka, who had been born with a birthmark covering half her face. Their village had whispered that she was marked by a demon, and the isolation had driven her to take her own life when she was 16. Vikram had been 14, helpless to protect her. "That's why I collect these stories," he explained as they salvaged soaked manuscripts. I want to show how these patterns repeat across villages, regions, even countries. It's never about curses. It's about human psychology, our need to explain suffering by assigning blame. Over the following weeks, as Devpur recovered from the flood, Deepa and Vikram fell into a partnership of sorts. They worked together cataloging his collection of narrative burden stories, identifying common elements and sociological patterns. Deepa's first-hand experience provided insights Vikram's academic approach had missed, while his theoretical framework helped her understand her experience as part of a broader human phenomenon. What will you do with all this research? Deepa asked him one evening as they walked along the now calm Narmada. Eventually, a book, I hope. Something that might help the next child labeled as cursed. He glanced at her. But there's a piece missing still. The stories I've collected are all fractured. What happened to these people after they were cast out? Most disappeared like you did. Few ever returned. Return? The word felt strange in Deepa's mouth. Why would anyone go back to a place that rejected them? Not for forgiveness, Vikram clarified. For resolution, to close the circle. He stopped, walking, turning to face her directly. Have you never thought about going back to Nalpur? Not to beg acceptance, but to show them who you've become in spite of their narrative? The question hung between them in the twilight air. Deepa thought of her family, her mother's averted eyes, her father's cold dismissal, the siblings who had been forbidden to speak her name. She thought of little Nikhil, whose death had been the final proof of her supposed curse. What would it accomplish? She finally asked. They would still believe what they believe. Perhaps, Vikram acknowledged. But you would know differently, and maybe, just maybe, seeing you whole and strong might create a crack in their certainty. Not for your sake, but for the next child they decide to blame. That night, Deepa dreamed of Nalpur for the first time in years. In the dream, she stood in the village square, and rain fell all around her but not on her. She woke with tears on her face and a decision in her heart. I'll go back, she told Vikram the next morning, but not alone. 3 days later, they boarded a bus to Nalpur together, the journal and Vikram's research carefully packed alongside Deepa's few possessions. As the landscape outside the window grew increasingly familiar, Deepa felt both terror and a strange, unexpected peace. She was no longer the girl who had been driven away 5 years before. She was someone new, someone who understood that stories could be rewritten, even the ones that seemed carved in stone. Flowers in stone gardens. Nalpur hadn't changed much in 5 years. The same dusty main road cut through the village center, flanked by the temple on one side and the small marketplace on the other. Children still played in the shadow of the split banyan tree, now supported by crude wooden braces. As Deepa and Vikram stepped off the bus, several villagers glanced their way with the mild curiosity reserved for strangers. No one recognized her. Are you all right? Vikram asked quietly, noticing how she'd frozen in place. Deepa nodded, unable to speak. She had prepared herself for accusing stares and hostile whispers, not this strange invisibility. She had changed. Certainly, her city clothes, her confident posture, the glasses she now wore for reading, but she had expected the label of cursed girl to somehow announce itself, like a visible mark. They found lodging at the home of an elderly widow who rented rooms to the occasional travelers passing through. Deepa gave a false name, not yet ready to reveal herself. That evening, she and Vikram walked through the village, with Deepa pointing out landmarks of her childhood in hushed tones. The school she had attended until the other parents demanded her removal, the well that had dried up, the temple she had never been allowed to enter. Your family's house? Vikram asked. Tomorrow, Deepa replied. I need time. But time proved unnecessary. The next morning, as they sat drinking chai in the widow's courtyard, a commotion erupted in the street outside. Voices were raised in excitement and concern. "What's happening?" Vikram asked their elderly host. "The headman's grandson has fallen ill," the widow explained, wringing her hands. "Very sudden. High fever, rash. They've called for a doctor from the city, but who knows when he'll arrive?" Deepa felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. Rohan, the headman's grandson, had been one of the children forbidden to play with her. He would be about 12 now. "What kind of rash?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice casual. "Red spots, starting on the chest, they say, spreading quickly." Deepa and Vikram exchanged glances. During their work at the society, they had helped Dr. Joshi compile a guide to rural medical practices. The symptoms sounded like measles, potentially serious, especially if complications developed. "I know something about this," Deepa said quietly. "From my work with a doctor in Devpur." The widow looked skeptical. "The family won't welcome strangers' advice, and they've already called upon Ganesh Baba for a blessing." Ganesh Baba, the village holy man who had once proclaimed that Deepa carried the evil eye. The same man who had suggested her brother's death was divine punishment for the family's failure to cast her out sooner. Deepa stood up, a curious calm settling over her. "Where are they keeping the boy?" Despite the widow's protests, Deepa walked purposefully toward the headman's large house at the village's northern edge. Vikram hurried behind her, research notes in hand. "Deepa, wait," he called. "What are you planning?" "I don't know yet," she admitted without slowing. "But I'm tired of running from this place." A small crowd had gathered outside the headman's home. Through the open door, Deepa could hear a child's labored breathing and a woman's worried murmurings. She recognized the woman's voice instantly. Kavita Auntie, the headman's daughter-in-law, who had once been kind to Deepa before the village's whispers reached her. Deepa stepped forward, parting the onlookers. Inside, she saw Ganesh Baba waving incense over a small figure lying on a cot. The boy's face was flushed with fever, his chest covered with a red rash exactly as the widow had described. "Measles," Deepa said clearly from the doorway. All eyes turned to her. For a moment, no one seemed to recognize the confident young woman standing before them. Then Ganesh Baba's eyes narrowed. "You," he hissed. "The cursed one returns, and see what follows." A murmur ran through the crowd. Kavita Auntie rose from beside her son's bed, her face pale. "Deepa?" she whispered. "Is it really you?" "It's measles," Deepa repeated, addressing Kavita directly and ignoring Ganesh Baba. "Not a curse. The rash pattern is distinctive. Has he been vaccinated?" Before Kavita could answer, the headman pushed through the doorway. "What is she doing?" "Here," he demanded. "Get her out. Her evil has returned to strike at my family." Vikram stepped forward then, research notes in hand. "Sir, my name is Vikram Khatri from the Cultural Preservation Society. I'm a researcher documenting rural medical knowledge. These symptoms clearly indicate measles, a preventable disease. Your grandson needs proper medical treatment, not superstition." "And who are you to come to our village and insult our ways?" the headman demanded. "He's right," came a quiet voice from the back of the room. Deepa's father stood there, grayer and thinner than she remembered. "My son, Nikhil, had the same rash before he died. The doctor in Mehrabad said it was measles then too, but we chose to believe—" He faltered, his eyes finally meeting Deepa's. "We chose to believe it was her fault instead." A heavy silence fell. Deepa felt years of pain and anger swell within her, but also, unexpectedly, compassion. Her father looked so much older, so burdened by the weight of his own choices. "The boy needs cool water, fever medication, and rest in a darkened room," Deepa said firmly. "The doctor will confirm it when he arrives. This isn't about blame, it's about saving a child." In the hours that followed, a remarkable transformation occurred. Under Deepa's guidance, supported by Vikram's medical references, they cared for young Rohan until the doctor arrived that evening. The physician confirmed the diagnosis, measles, complicated by dehydration, and commended their interim care. As night fell, Deepa found herself sitting in her family's home for the first time in 5 years. The conversation was difficult, painful, punctuated by long silences and occasional tears. Her mother couldn't stop touching her face, as if confirming she was real. Her father spoke little, but listened intently as Deepa and Vikram explained their research into how villages created scapegoats to explain misfortune. "There were so many coincidences," her mother whispered. "The tree, the well, Nikhil. It seemed like proof." "Humans see patterns even where none exist," Vikram explained, gently. "It's how our minds work. But correlation isn't causation." "I believed it too for a while," Deepa admitted. "I thought I was toxic somehow. But then I found Vikram's journal, and I began to see how my story was just one of many similar stories across hundreds of villages." Later that night, as Deepa and Vikram walked beneath the stars, she felt a strange lightness. Nothing had been fully resolved. Years of pain couldn't be erased in a single day. Her family had asked her to stay longer, to give them time to make amends, but Deepa wasn't sure yet what she wanted. "What happens now?" Vikram asked as they passed the split banyan tree. Deepa touched the rough bark, feeling the place where the lightning had struck all those years ago. The tree hadn't died as everyone had predicted. Instead, it had grown around its wound, incorporating the damage into its new shape. "Now we continue the work," she said. "There are other villages, other stories to document, other children labeled as cursed who need to know they aren't alone." "And Nalpur?" he asked. "Will you make peace with this place?" Deepa looked around at the sleeping village, seeing it clearly for the first time. Not as the source of all her pain, but simply as a place where people lived and loved and feared, making the best sense they could of an unpredictable world. "I already have," she realized aloud. "Not because they deserve forgiveness, but because I deserve freedom from this story." 3 days later, when they departed Nalpur, several villagers came to see them off, including Deepa's family. Her mother pressed a small bundle into her hands, Nikhil's favorite book, and a handful of marigold seeds from their garden. "For wherever you decide to plant roots," her mother said softly. As the bus pulled away, Deepa opened the journal she and Vikram now shared, where they documented their research. On a fresh page, she began to write, "The curse was never mine to carry. The narrative was never mine to bear. What happens when we take back the power to write our own stories? This is what I intend to discover." Beside her, Vikram smiled as he watched the words flow across the page. Outside the window, Nalpur receded into the distance, no longer a place of exile, but simply one chapter in a much larger story that Deepa was still writing.